Do you know where did you find the water? It's on the back.
Everyone in today's discussion voted for you?
I think so.
Well, not on at all. Did he give any reason to think he'd vote?
He said he's
It's done.
Yeah, actually. I wonder if I can. No, like this is literally Krister has to present, be the jabber scribe and the note taker.
Surprisingly saw. It was like another.
Yes,
And
this
then I
is
saw like like a huge
right. This
people show up here.
that's what I was saying. I think there's, in fact, active attendees. I think 2. Actually, yeah.
You got Krister and you got we need a note taker. I can jump it, but we can still need a note taker.
You used to have one participant 10 years ago.
Yes, we did. I guess that means SIP is mostly done, right?
Of course.
So you
Yeah, Ben's gonna jabber scribe, but we need a note taker. Is this? Go ahead. So welcome everyone to SIPCORE. We are in the business of needing a note taker. If we could have a volunteer, please. Thank you. Sorry, one more second. Ben, you'll jabber scribe? Thank you.
Roland is the note taker. Thank you. So, welcome to SIPCORE in Bangkok, IETF 103. We start with NoteWell. Hopefully you all have seen this in previous meetings this week. If not, please read on the slides what you're signing up for if you make comments here or participate. Blue sheets are going around. We have a note taker and we have a Jabber relay. As you might notice, we're not Jean and Robert. They couldn't make it here to Bangkok, so we're like substitutes. And that gets us to the agenda for today.
You're not Brian either.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
And this has been, thank you very much for substituting. That's very helpful.
No worries. All right. Today's agenda. It's pretty much like one presentation, which is Krista on session timer glare. Any agenda bash? Doesn't look like. All right. I don't know if you.
Hey, Ben, do you know if Jean was planning to join remotely?
Gene is Alice.
Alice, but she.
Got it.
Ah, there you go.
And there she is.
Okay, can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, hey, this is Jean Mahoney. I am participating remotely and just wanted to give a brief update on the drafts for SIPCORE. So last call has ended for the originating CDIV parameter draft, and Marianne is updating it with last call feedback, and I assume it's going to hit a telechat agenda fairly soon. The next 3 drafts listed are under ED evaluation. And then the next page, we have our active working group drafts. So we're going to be discussing session time arrays today. The rejected response code for rejected calls is of interest to the STIR working group. It's received a little bit of discussion so far. And then finally, the location source parameter for the geolocation header. It has received some feedback and the authors are reviewing that, and we'll be updating that draft soon. So that's what I've got for working group status. And we can move on to Krister's presentation.
Thank you, Jean.
Okay, hello everyone. This is something that's been going on for a while. This session timer glare handling. It's been on a hold for a little while, partly because of me having focused pretty much on the zip push stuff. But we tried now to move forward with this. So as you can see here, we've also opened a GitHub, or actually we already had a GitHub repo for this, but we also, in addition to storing the draft there, we also opened or try to say using the issue tracker for really opening and trying to log all the issues, because we saw that, or at least it was very difficult for me to follow some of the email discussions. There were threads which were jumping all over. So we tried to address the issues there. So please have a look. So next slide, please. As you can see there is also a draft, and some people have commented on the draft. And okay, so for first, yeah, this what it's all about. So this is just a recap, unless you have followed this work before. The current session timer RFC, it's very unclear, or actually it doesn't really describe it at all, when you have simultaneous session timer negotiation taking place simultaneously. And what we mean by that is, for example, if you have the initial or even a re-invite transaction where you negotiate the session timer, and within that invite transaction, what is still active, you may send updates because of precondition or whatever codec negotiation. And also if in those updates, you may have session timer information, and then you're going to get different responses. And if the different responses have different session timer information, expiration values, the refresher role, and all these things, who are you going to trust? For example, if you get the 200 to the invite and the 200 to an update, which are you going to trust? And in some cases, you may also the sender of the invite may receive an update request, and then you don't know. Was this sent before the 200 okay or after, and so on, as messages shift on the network. So we really need to try to come up with a solution where you don't really have to guess in which order something was sent, and in which order the remote pair and the intermediate and everything receive it. And again, this is actually something which is creating big problems in deployed networks. This is just not an engineering exercise when I read the RFC and didn't have anything else to do, so let's try to fix some bugs. This is actually causing a lot of problems. So next slide, please. Yeah, this one, like I was just gonna say, yes, at some point you should read it, but you don't really have to read the current version because it's not up to date with the discussions we've had. I haven't updated it for a long time. There were some people commenting on the text, but really, you don't need to do that. It's going to be changed pretty much based on the discussions we've had. And one reason for that is because initially I was maybe a little too naive, thinking, yeah, we only need to update maybe 1 or 2 or 3 sections, and that's it. So it's going to be a short track. But as as the discussions have progressed, we've seen that there are probably going to be a little need for more updates. So I really want. But before I do that, and before we discuss exactly how it's going to look like, I think we really need to, at least on a higher level, try to agree on an approach how we're going to move forward. Then it's easier, because otherwise it's just going to be walking in the dark and spending a lot of time. Yeah. So next draft, please. Now, what's happened since the last meetings? I said there hasn't happened too much. At least, as I said, from my side, that's very much because of the SIP push work. Now, however, a few weeks ago, I tried to get this rolling again. We've had email discussions, pretty intensive. Thank you to everyone who's participated in those. Like I said earlier, I tried to use GitHub to track the issues. As always, all decisions are going to be made here or in the community. We're not going to make a decision on GitHub, but at least trying to catch or document the issues there. And we had a phone call last week or the week before that, where I really tried to talk about the suggestion that I'm also going to present here, to see whether people interested are okay with that. So I don't come here with a solution and everyone disagrees and again, spending time. So we'll see what happens. So next slide, please. Now, the working assumption here is that, like some people have said, and I agreed, the easiest thing as far as standardization is concerned would just be to throw the RC away and do session timer all over again, right? That would be the easiest way. But that doesn't work, because, like I said, this is deployed and everything. So we need to try to fix it. Now, and also some of the discussions, and also that's partly my fault, really went into discussing other things that people found with the session timer. Yeah, this is how we could make it better, and so on. But I think really we need to focus on fixing this glare issue. Really, I mean that's what we need to fix. If there are non-related bugs, sure, we can fix those also. And like I said, please put them on GitHub. But we're not going to do modification, or at least that's not within the charter, and if someone disagrees, please do. But we're not going to do modification just because someone thinks something could be done in a better way. Session timer is what it is. It has bugs, and our aim is to fix those bugs. Yeah.
This is Ben. I would implore everyone to focus on bugs that are actually breaking things.
Yeah.
In the field.
And as we also said, there is obviously no solution that's going to make every existing implementation standards compliant without any changes or anything. I mean, if that would be the case, we wouldn't have a problem, right? So, but really, we try to come up with the changes that we need to do, but at the same time, try to make existing implementations work. It's obviously not always going to happen. Like any standard, when you find a bug and you fix those bugs, I mean, you may have to update some implementations. I mean, that's life. So next slide, please. No, the way we split it up is we're going to modify the UAC procedures, I mean, this is my suggestion. We're in the UAS and the proxy procedures. Now, the text you see here is not an extensive list of all the procedures. It's what I think is important as far as this discussion is concerned. Now, the thing you see in the text you see in black is basically existing procedures in the RFC, which I think they are important to point out, but they are not modified-ish. I mean, there may be, maybe not a must or should, but I mean, it's implicit. So and the text you see in violet is basically the change suggestions that I have, or new procedure or restriction of existing procedures, etc. So for the UAC, basically, if the UA inserts the SE, which is the session expires header field, in an invite, and the UA must insert the same SE in any update request that is sent while the invite transaction is ongoing. That means before you receive the final response to the invite transaction and so on. So you can't send your invite and have session expires value X, and then you send an update with session expires value Y. If you, for whatever reason, want to change to Y, you have to wait until the invite transaction, everything is done, and then you can send a new one with Y or whatever you want. No, this is how we want to do. Now, when you have existing implementations, even if you do this, you may get conflicting information back. You may get different values in the 200 to the invite and the 200 to the update. There's very little to do that. So basically what we're saying here, if the UAC gets conflicting information, it really doesn't know what it should do. Just send a new update after the invite transaction is done. Try to, this is the value I want to use. Send an update. You're not going to have these invites and updates and everything. You're just going to have that update transaction. So basically renegotiate the session timer. So next slide, please. Then the proxy. First, how the proxy handles the request. Must reject I guess I should say must reject the invite or the request if the expiration value is too short. Basically, what the RFC today say, it may do so. It may reject, but I think we should make it stronger. I mean, if a proxy thinks that the value is too short, it should reject it. I mean, that's what the UAC do. And the second bullet, again, violet, is similar to the UAC. If the proxy inserts or forwards or modifies the session expire value in an invite request, it must do the same thing for all update requests that it receives to make sure that the value is aligned. Now, originally I suggested, again, similar for the UAC, was that if there is an ongoing invite transaction. Now, as we've had some discussions, it has been indicated that proxy doesn't necessarily know whether there is an ongoing invite transaction. And so basically we're saying here that it doesn't need to know. Just insert the values in the same value in all requests. Now, if the proxy knows that whether there is or is not an ongoing transaction, it can, do whatever it wants. But in general, I think that, and this is also something that I plan to put in the draft, try to avoid having to renegotiate the session timer. I mean, from the beginning, insert the value you want. There may be some third-party call control use case or something where you really need to renegotiate the session timer during the session, but in general, there shouldn't really be a need. Now, the response handling, if there is... Yep. When the proxy gets a response, if it contains S session expires, the proxy must not modify it. That's existing procedures. And if the response does not contain a session expires, the proxy may insert it if it remembers that the request indicated support of the session timer. Now, this is also existing procedures. One thing which was raised on the list was that, this is fine. but this only applies if the UAC has indicated that it wants to be the refresher. If the UAC has indicated that the UAS should be the refresher and the UAS doesn't support session timer, then this obviously is not going to work. So that's a clarification that I think we should put into the draft. So next slide, please. And then the UAS. Again, if the request contains SC, the UAS copies the SC of the request into the response. This is existing procedures, nothing strange about that. What I'm suggesting here is that the UAS must not reduce the SC expiration value in the response. Currently, it's allowed to do that. Really, the suggestion here is that if the UAS, for whatever reason, wants to do it, there was also a use case where the UAS may not even know at that point what value it wants to use. There may be some ongoing precondition negotiation or whatever. But the suggestion here is that just copy the same value into the response, and if the UAS, for whatever reason, doesn't like the value, again, once the invite transaction, everything's done, send a new update and try to fix it. The session timer expiration is normally going to be pretty long. I mean, we're talking about many minutes in most cases, or even more. So it's really not going to cause any trouble, because most likely you're not going to send any refreshes anyway while everything is ongoing. So in addition to whatever updates you're otherwise going to send And if the received request does not contain US, the session expires, but it does contain the indication that the UAC support it, the UAS might include session expires in the response. This is also existing procedure, so nothing strange. Next slide, please. Now there are some open issues. I mean, this is not all of them. I may have forgot something. Again, some of the issues I don't think are related, and these are not even directly related to this glare situation either. I mean, these are things which could happen at any time. These are other so-called bugs, which I think would be useful to handle. I don't want to spend too much discussion on them. I just want to raise them in case people are interested. One of the things which was raised was that if you have non-offer update request glare situations, what I mean is that you have update requests which do not contain offer, and both endpoints send them at the same time. This was actually a surprise to me. I thought it's covered by the glare situation procedures that we have in RFC 3311, 6141, and 3261, etc., but it doesn't, because those procedures only apply to when the update contains an offer for whatever reason, or actually when both updates contain an offer. So if you send a session refresh request without an offer, and the other endpoint for whatever reason sends an update with an offer for maybe wants to modify something, and they collide, there is no procedure of how to handle that, sending 491 or whatever. So that we need to discuss. I mean, there is a discussion already. Should we, apply the 491, the glare handling situations also for this? Should we just, no, it's an implementation issue, whatever. The second bullet, I mentioned that already, is that when the proxy inserts the section expires in the response, the proxy can only insert if the UAC indicated that it's willing to do the refreshes, because the UAS hasn't indicated support of the mechanism. Then there was also, I mean, this is maybe a pure editorial issue, but there was kind of discussion of what initial session refresh request means, because initial sounds are like this is the first of something, but refresh sounds like this is something that's coming later. So again, we'll see if we have to fix that somehow, but I mean, that should only be an editorial exercise. Yeah. So next slide, please. That's it. Any comments?
Roland, Deutsche Telekom. I fully support the proposals, and I would like to come to an end, since we are one of the hidden networks with problems on session timer, real problems. So with regard to that, I would like to see that we come to a solution very soon. So and it looks not bad. Thank you.
Roman, you have the floor.
Yes. I also support the proposal, and I actually wanted to comment on some of the slides. One thing which I would like to mention is on the 9th, the non-offer update. Resolving the glare on update is also related to the initial glare issue, because without resolving this as well, there is no easy way to kind of fix up any sort of collision issues, because when we propose that we're going, if we have some sort, any sort of negotiation collision between invite and updates, and both user agents are not clear what the current session timer is, that they should just do an update transaction. The fact, like, there is a good chance both of them will do an update transaction, will end up in a glare situation and end up exactly where they started. So so we kind of need to solve solving this problem is related, because there is need to be a way to resolve this. Again, there are a couple of other comments on other slides, but it's probably better to do it on the list, because it's essentially details of how this will be solved, but we just need to kind of look at this issue with the initial with the session timer negotiation when multiple transactions are in progress. And from what we've seen, solving it cannot be done as a just a separate draft which updates the session timer. It looks like it requires a BIS draft, because all updates are kind of spread out through the session timer draft. So most likely the new BIS draft would be much easier to comprehend and understand versus having a separate draft which just tries to address this issue, which is going to be extremely confusing.
Yeah, I agree that. I didn't bring that up on purpose, because I didn't really want the discussion to go into, are we going to make a BIS or not? But I totally agree with Roman. I also had some offline discussions, at least with the chairs. I think Ben was involved also, where I basically said that, yeah, probably it would be much easier to write a BIS instead of trying to update. Because, like I said, there's a lot of sections where are probably going to be affected if we're trying to, in addition, going to clarify the session refresh requests and so on. It's going to be tricky. Now, as far as I'm concerned, and now I know, I guess Gene is still on the line. If we would do a BIS, I think we need to have a very strong statement that the scope of it. Sometimes we have that, but sometimes it's getting sloppy, and assuming I would be the author of that, I don't want this to become another never-ending thing. So it should be very clear what we're going to do.
This is Ben. I agree. And actually, to your previous comment, Jean is online. She's Alice. But
okay.
I agree. And I was actually going to stand up and say, I don't object to a BIS, but if you do a BIS, I would like people to be draconian in scope control, which probably means if we're going to do a BIS, let's notate the milestone in some way that says, here's what we're fixing. And if people want to fix other things, they can do their own BIS.
Alice, floor is yours.
Thank you. This is Jean. Yes, my first name is Alice. I go by my middle name. So with the keeping the scope firmly in check for a BIS draft, would a quick and dirty requirements draft be helpful, where you sketch out what needs to be captured, or the list, break it down and, here are high priority bugs we want to fix. We've identified these enhancements for this, but we're not going to touch them. or do we just capture that in the mailing list discussions? I'm just kind of tossing that out as, is that something to consider?
This is Ben again. Please don't spin on requirements. I think people know what the requirements are, right? So if the requirements, if we're writing a requirements draft, I really hope it doesn't end up blocking work on the solution.
Okay.
But also keep in mind that you've got a workgroup wiki and things like that that are good places to document things like this that don't have a need for archival purposes, where you're not going to, no one's going to care what the requirements draft said after the biz is published. Unless you think there's some reason to keep it, that we can describe to the IESG who will start abstaining on things like this, unless we have a really good reason.
Yeah, my last 2 trips, Ben, to the ISG, they have no appetite for requirement drafts at all. So,
yeah. From experience.
Speaking as an ISG member, I can tell you that's very true.
And I agree. And in any case, of course, if we would, or when we do the biz, there will be a section where we actually describe the changes from the previous or the current RFC and so on. But I don't think we need we've had this requirement RFC before. One we had in RTC Web. The funny thing was that once we finalized that requirements draft, we have it already done a lot of the solution drafts. So yeah.
Okay, I just poked at that, and I'm hearing, nope, we don't need it, and that's good.
Ben, do you have something?
See if Paula is wanting to comment on this particular thing, or if it's something different.
Can you hear me?
Okay, Paul. Yep. You're on.
Okay. Well, just regarding requirements, I think I'm in violent agreement that we don't need a requirements document, but if we're going to do the BIS, we ought to informally enumerate the requirements we're going to do. And limiting the scope, I also agree. For one thing, I think we aren't changing any. I mean, really, this is mostly about clarifications, not changing anything. The one thing I've just observed for forever that I hope we can do, even though it might be optional in some sense, is that nobody ever really understands this thing correctly. I think it was just so poorly, the language of it was so confusing or misleading or something that I think it just needs a bunch of text improvements just to clarify things. But I realize that the most important thing is the race condition.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's a lot of text, for example, that can be simplified by having bullet points and so on. So if we do the BIS, I mean, sure, we should also we can make the text more readable, because I don't just want to copy paste text which is difficult to understand. But again, that's not a technical change. That's right. Just an editorial exercise. So.
Hi. Again, my suggestion is to limit the scope firmly to what the value of session timer should be when multiple transactions are in multiple session timer negotiation transactions are in progress at the same time. If the language which should be new should be written in the in this clear fashion as possible, but again, we're writing this draft trying to clarify things which we are not touching. Again, should probably be out of scope. Again, it's because if we're touching this, we're kind of getting onto this slippery slope of trying to resolve 10-15 years worth of unclear issues that people can again discuss forever. So just trying to deal with multiple with this issue which is completely undescribed in the current draft, and again kind of trying to focus on that. If something can be easily fixed, then we should fix it, but again, that should be pretty much out of scope. Again, I want to limit it so it can be finished reasonably quickly.
This is Ben. I was coming up to say almost exactly what Roman said. And I would, if there is text that needs to be made easier to read because it's ambiguous and it's causing these problems, then by all means fix it. But if there's just other unrelated text that is hard to read, but it's not causing problems right now, I would advise you not to. And the reason for that is when you hit the review process and when you go to IETF last call and when you go to ISG evaluation, if we can just look at a diff and see what the real changes are, the evaluation is easy. If you look at the diff and everything's changed, even things that aren't related to the technical differences, it becomes very hard. And what happens is people start reviewing the entire document and they start trying to change all this other stuff that was out of scope for your stuff, for your change. And then we have to get into a roundabout with people to explain, no, that's not what we're working on this time. I have come to believe that editorial and stylistic improvements that are not material to the change being made in a biz are very risky downstream through the, when you start going through the general IETF consensus process.
No, I agree, and I guess I should be clarified that these so-called bullet points that I've been looking into and drafting kind of my own, they are all related. It's how you create the request. You know, what header field you insert or don't insert. So it's not all related to that. Then there's background text and everything in the draft. I don't plan to on touching that, and so. But again, this initial session request refresh that may have. But let's see. I think we don't need to do editing here. I'm just wondering, is it possible? As always, it has to be confirmed on the list. But could we really try to trigger the whole thing already now? So asking whether someone would object to.
So I think the question becomes: are we coming to a consensus, for whatever it's worth in this room, on continuing with this draft or with the BIS effort and having that replace any efforts that are ongoing now?
Does anyone who has not come to the microphone care?
I mean, the thing is that if we would do a BIS, it would
lovely.
take some time to write the first version of it, right? So yeah. And at least that's not something I want to do unless we know that. I'm not saying that I'm going to write it and it's a blank check. I mean, people may have whatever comments on it, and that's fine. But if people have an issue with the idea of doing an BIS in the first place, I think we should raise it now before we start writing stuff down.
Roland here, Deutsche Telekom. I was in favor for BIS because I was asked so many times from my people how to implement this session timer, because there are interpretations going around, even with, let's say, your company, how to interpret this draft, and there are real failures, and this is not the only failure we had with the session timer. So that there are the glare situations, what is when hitting both sides doing updates, and there's a broken back-to-back user agent letting through these requests and everything. So, but nevertheless, I would like to see a very fast solution to get the failures out of the network. And if we can hit the scope to your presentation, say, so that's the scope what we would like to solve, that's it. I don't care about the documentation. So either we do that what you have done, old text, new text, or we could also do the BIS, which would be more readable for my people, but nevertheless, I know what to do. Thank you.
Okay, sounds like from the purposes of what we have in the room right now, the decision is to move to a BIS effort. Obviously, that'll have to be confirmed on the list. But I think that's the decision. And by the way, Krista, if you need any help, I mean, I know all this stuff falls to you, but I'm willing to help out if you need it.
Yeah, I wonder, is there XML for the RC available somewhere? Because it's pretty old.
If not, I think they can convert it.
Yeah, so. There's a tool for that nowadays, I think.
Right.
The RFC editor, I believe the RFC editor can provide it. It may not.
That's the thing.
Format
I
identically,
think
but-
they use a conversion tool. It's not perfect, but it's good enough.
I'm coming to the mic for Gene, saving a red button push, I guess. Jean said that she's comfortable declaring that we have a sense of the room that from discussion so far to go ahead and do a biz. Obviously, that needs to be confirmed on the list.
Excellent. That's all I have.
I think that's all we have. Thank you, everyone.
All right, that's the end of the session. Thank you. See you in Prague.
Scope.